Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Poison Pen on Sunday, August the 9th. Now, just to clear up a slight bit of confusion, this is Robert Pobi from Toronto with his editor Keith Kahla, an event we're so excited about that Karen has come in to join me, and Patrick, because Robert Pobi is a store favorite. At 1 o'clock, an hour from now, Lee Child will be hosting Mark Billingham from the UK. So if we confused you on the times, I apologize. So hang around if you came for one and see the other. So Robert Pobi, published in 25 countries. He's written other novels besides Dr. Lucas Page. The one I think that might be best known is called Mannheim Rex, which has an origin story he may or may not want to tell you. I think that Dr. Lucas Page is the most exciting thriller protagonist to come along since Jack Reacher, so there's a curious synchronicity here in our two events, which totally unplanned, but just turned out that way. Robert says that he shuns social media and interviews, so we're really lucky that he's joining us today. But he's working on his email skills, which I can attest to because we've recently exchanged emails. So welcome, Robert.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
And welcome, Keith, one of my favorite people. I don't get to see him often enough. We've been together, Lord, how long is it? 30 years now?
We met at the Omaha Voucher Con.
Oh, Lord, that's right. In the middle of Nebraska.
Right, at the Holodome. It was an epic Voucher Con.
It was. It really was. I remember that. Didn't we have to drive 25 miles into the nearest city to eat?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think that was it, right. Well, and we've been together, ever since. Keith and I normally arrange to meet at various conventions. But luckily, now that we have Zoom, I get to see him more often. So, Keith, you were Robert Pobi's editor, so I'm going to turn this over to you. I have a couple of questions of my own, but why don't you get started?
Well, okay, so this is our second Dr. Lucas Page novel. First one being City of Windows, and the new one out, as you can see above my head, is Under Pressure. I'm going to say, Rob, now give us the elevator pitch. Explain Under Pressure.
My main character, my protagonist, he's an astrophysicist. He used to work for the FBI. Something happened to him. We don't know what exactly. And he's retired from the FBI. He teaches at Columbia. He's got 5 adopted children. He doesn't like guns. He's by no means a peacenik or anything. He just doesn't understand. He thinks of guns as sticks and stones. Really, he tries to find approaches a little bit more, cerebral or modern. And every now and then he goes back to the FBI to give them a hand with something when their computers can't figure something out that his inimitable brain can.
So this is your first attempt to write a series character, and we know the hiccups of that. But so what was your inspiration for Lucas Page? What about him do you find interesting, and what makes him so interesting that you want to keep coming back to him?
Well, that was a big struggle I had after that. You and I had a conversation where you were offering me a series, and I got off the phone. I was pacing around the house and trying to figure out, can I do this? Because, my natural, set point was I thought that series were for lazy writers. And I'll use no, but I did. I'll use James Bond as an example. We know let's use a scene from a film, which is going to be the same for many of the modern books. He's going to show up at a party wearing a very nice suit or evening wear, probably Canali. He's going to be driving a very expensive car that most people have never heard of. He's going to walk in, he's going to order his martini in that way that he does. He's going to introduce himself last name first. Then he's going to make a beeline for the prettiest woman in the little cocktail dress and the pearl necklace. Beat somebody up and leave. So I thought by getting into a series, I was signing up for the same thing again. I thought it was going to be drudgery. And I didn't realize that a series would enable me to get to know my character a lot better, to flesh him out a lot more, and to put him in predicaments that I want to see him get out. So I don't. That's just part of the question, I guess. First off, what inspired Lucas? I'm not going to say I built Lucas around the story, but I think that definitely came into play. I wanted somebody that could handle this. The first investigation in City of Windows when the story came to me, and Lucas. He just came to me out of the ether. I met him literally the first time he was climbing up the stairs in chapter 2. That's when Lucas hit me, and he just came to me as this full-grown human being. I don't know, I know the Lucas of now. I don't know the Lucas of before. I don't know what he was like as a teenager or as a young man, but The Lucas that we get now, I'm pretty comfortable with. That being said, I'm learning about the guy all the time.
So, okay, Under Pressure, was, again, your first attempt to write about a character again. It opens up with this great scene, which is this thermobaric explosion at the Guggenheim. Literally wipes everybody out in seconds and leaves the building intact, as it were. And I think you got some delight in killing millions of Warhol paintings at the same time.
Not at all. No, I'm actually a fan of Warhol. People make this erroneous assumption that I am automatically, of the same opinion of the omnipotent narrator in Lucas's life, and it's not the case. In a lot of things, from some of his politics to a lot of the things he says. It's like method acting. I adopt a certain narrative voice to best serve the story and the character.
So in all the drafts, though, that opening scene never changed at all. It was, that set in stone.
And I don't think I wrote that first. I wrote Lucas's scene in the country, which is chapter 2 first. Just because I knew what had happened, and I generally do that. Just like I didn't have an ending for this book the first time I sent it to you. I tend to not write my endings. I'll put something in the end, but it's not going to make me happy most of the time. I have to let the whole thing percolate a little bit, and then call you 375 times and discuss, what do you think is going to work best for this?
It was only 312.
Yeah.
You're getting better. So let's talk a little bit more about Lucas. Partly because I'm assuming some of the audience don't know him as well as you and I do at this stage.
Okay.
And so, what we know about Lucas is he was an FBI agent. He's missing some body parts from an event that happened in the past. And he has an irascible personality, a great second wife, and as I recall, the first wife left him when he was in the hospital missing an arm and a leg and an eye. And then he's got 5 adopted children and 2 dogs and a, best friend living in the gatehouse, as it were.
Yes, exactly.
So all these little pieces that make up Lucas, the question I have is, what do you think is the most defining? How he interacts with the kids, how he interacts with the wife.
I think the most defining characteristic of Lucas is his patience and his love for his family and his children. Absolutely. Obviously he's atypical physically, but I don't really see that as something that takes away from him in any respect. It just happens to be who he is. He happens to have prosthetics. It's not something that defines him. But the way he is with his family, I get to bring out this gentle, kind, vibe that he just doesn't have to people at large, mostly because he doesn't suffer fools, but he's trying to teach his children to be, good members of the world and good members of society, and that takes a lot of his patience because he doesn't believe society deserves people like his children most of the time.
Now, one of the things that I thought was great about City of Windows, one of the small touches that you really brought out was what happens to his prosthetics when it's really cold weather. You brought in limitations. Like, it never occurred to me that it would be harder for him to walk because the metal gets stressed in really cold weather.
Yeah, well, all the different metals contract at different degrees, so the pins will get smaller, some things will get looser, some things will get tighter. Absolutely.
What kind of research did you do into this?
A friend of mine was taking a blood thinner about 10 years back, and he was taking something, I forget what the condition was for, but it actually knocked out his leg. He lost the use of his right leg, and he had to walk with a cane. He just showed up at the hospital, so I can't move my leg. And it turned out that this medication, Vioxx, had attacked the system, and a lot of people were going through this. So he ended up going to a rehabilitation clinic to learn how to walk again. And he was having trouble getting in, so I went down to talk to the director of the place. And I was explaining to him, the situation. He says, well, you're really lucky. It's been a very, very, it's been a shitty springtime, so we don't have the motorcycle guys coming in all the time. A lot of quadriplegic and paraplegic. And I was like, and I started talking to him, and I met some people at the rehabilitation center, including an electrician who had lost both arms and both legs in an accident. And the guy was sitting there playing cards with some friends, and it wasn't this big defining moment in his life. It wasn't this thing that had changed his world. It changed it, but it wasn't this thing that he got past it. He was just a guy that, I lost my arms and my legs, and now I'm playing cards. And I spent a lot of time at the rehabilitation center talking and playing cards with a lot of different people, and just, kind of learning about the things that, how hard it is to do up a button, or things that, you and I would not necessarily, we're physically typical, so we don't struggle with that stuff. So I try to put the interesting stuff in there.
Could I ask?
I mean, one of the things I thought must be the most challenging is to come up with a villain that's worthy of your genius character.
I'm not going to say no. I try to come up with a story that's worthy of my genius character, but I mean, you can take the dumbest serial killer. Let's go with like Henry Lee Lucas, who had an IQ of your average household dog. I mean, Henry Lee Lucas, when you release these people out in the world, they can do an awful lot of damage before people hunt them down, in that they're thinking, because someone's using a different mind than you can put a bright guy against a stupid guy. I mean, that's possible. I try to have the story setting. Like, as you know, I agonize over the story being smart and making people want to read more.
Okay. Now, what I was going to say is like just a simple one, which is, what are your favorite characters in the series, and who's the easiest to write, and at the same time, who are the hardest ones to write? Who do you struggle with the most? Not Lucas, but all the rest of them.
No, that's a good question. I mean, I struggle a bit with Whitaker because I don't want Whitaker and Lucas's rapport to be the same all the time. But that being said, I see them as a comedy duo almost half the time, because she does not suffer his preening, I guess would be the word. But I'm not going to say Whitaker's difficult to. Kehoe is difficult to write.
Step in for a second and explain who Whitaker and Quito are.
Sorry, Whitaker is Lucas's sometimes partner. That when he comes back to the FBI, Brett Kehoe, who's the special agent in charge of Manhattan, always teams him up with Whitaker because she's one of the few people that can take him for more than about 45 seconds at a time.
So Kehoe's a challenge.
So Kehoe's a challenge because he's almost like the devil in Paradise Lost. He's in the back always whispering these sweet things in Lucas's ear, and he knows what he's doing. Lucas knows what he's doing. What he's telling Lucas is, look, you can have your old life back. Come to me, I can make it happen. And it's not going to happen, and Lucas knows it's not going to happen. He knows he's not going back to who he was, and Kehoe knows he's not, but it's this little bit of manipulation that they allow each other to do. It's like this codependent, marriage, that they've developed these certain bad habits, but they both need them in order to get what they want.
I mean, one of the things that's also interesting about Lucas is this intimation, first in City of Windows and a little bit more filled in Under Pressure, is he has a past, not just the FBI past.
Oh, no.
He was raised by this Diane of New York socialite who adopted him. But you tell us very little. I mean, one of the things I like is how you don't tell us anything more than we need to understand the story right now.
Well,
how much more do you know?
That's a good question. Like I said, I didn't meet Lucas till after his accident. That being said, I probably know a little bit more than everybody else, but not as much as people would think. I follow this one adage with my writing, and whether it's a paragraph or a sentence or a chapter or the entire novel, I don't have to let the reader know everything. I just have to let the reader know enough. And that's what I try to do. It's kind of like when I used to write a little bit more in the horror genre, I just like flicking the lights on, like Ridley Scott's Alien. You don't see that alien a lot, but the 3.5 seconds that you see it in the entire film are enough that we're still talking about it 43 years later. So that's what I try to do with Lucas and with the way I work, is I flip the lights on a little bit, let you know what you need to know, then turn them off, because you don't need to know anything else. That's all you need to know.
So City of Windows was your sort of first traditional crime novel. What brought you moving from sort of something more horror to a more traditional crime novel?
I don't know. I'd like to say there's a definitive answer. I was sitting outside eating grapes and drinking wine and cutting cheese, with a little silver knife, and this bird came and sat on my shoulder and whispered Lucas Page in my window. But I have no idea how the story again presented itself first. I was looking at a lot of the gun violence in the U.S., and the story came to me, and it just this was the kind of character and kind of setting that this particular story needed, and it just grew into the series.
One of the other things I was going to sort of point out is, you started writing or you started writing for publication late in life. Most people start when they're 12, and you may have too, but your first novel came out some decades after that.
Yes.
So what led you to going to, commercial writing?
I'll try not to make this a long story because it could be long. I think, well, I sold my first novel when I was 23. And the publisher ended up being bought out by one of the big six, or which was probably the big eight at the time. And they canned all their new writers. And I was one of the writers that got canned. And so I spent the next 20 years just not sending manuscripts to anybody. I continued writing because I enjoyed the writing process. I had never really intended to publish. When I sold my first book, I showed it to a professor. I was just finishing university. And I told a professor about it over dinner one night. And he said, well, I'd like to read it. So I gave him a copy a couple of days later, and 3 o'clock in the morning, but a week afterwards, I was living at home, my mother comes to wake me up, and she says, there's some man on the phone who wants to talk to you. And so I picked up the phone, and he said, look, Rob, he said, I just read your book. If you don't send this out, you're an idiot. And the first people I sent it to sent me a check and a 3-book contract. And so I accidentally became a writer, because I enjoyed the process, but I hadn't really thought about the publishing part. And then life kind of got in the way. I kept writing books, but I developed other interests. I opened an antique shop. My life went on into a lot of different broad areas. But I kept writing. Every morning I'd get to my shop at 4 o'clock and write till 9 or 10 o'clock. Every weekend I'd spend working on a manuscript. And then it got to the point where I was at a point in life where a lot of things happened. I just had to make a decision. What did I want to do? Did I want to spend the rest of my life doing what I was doing? Or did I want to take a shot at something new? And I decided I was going to give writing, my 100% attention.
And is that still your process, that you get up at 4 in the morning and write till 10?
No. I get at 10 in the morning and write till 4 the next day, basically. I don't really have a process. I try not to email you at 2 and 3 o'clock because I'm petrified your phone's going to go off on your nightstand or something. But the process for me now is when I start on a book, I should say used to, but I think it takes about 9 to 10 to 11 weeks for me to finish a manuscript, a first draft. 90 to 100 days, and then the editing process comes. But schedule-wise, I just work. When it becomes more than a full-time job for me. I'll as you know, I'll do a 27-hour schedule, so I'll write for 27 hours, and I'll sleep for 7 hours, and I'll write for 27, and sleep for the last few weeks of a book. So it's not something I have control of. It's the only way I can operate. I'd love to do it 9 to 5, but my brain doesn't work that way.
Well, I know a lot of writers. One of the ones that I'm about to publish, she used to get up at 4:30 in the morning and then stop at 6:30 when her kids got up.
That makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. I find I was doing more writing in a way when I wasn't published than I am being published, because now I've got this audience over my shoulder, so I spend a lot of time agonizing over my decisions, when I am writing. So it takes me longer to do a chapter than it would have in the old days.
Yeah. So the stuff in the background, is that all from your days as a seller of antiques, like the lamp?
No, actually, yes and no. I have an interest in early American. I really like early American, early 20th century, late 19th century American arts and crafts and missions. So the lamp falls into that. The ceramics fall into that. The mask behind me is one of the copper faces from the Commodore Hotel in New York. So.
And still, how did you get that? You didn't climb up there and take it, of course.
No. The building was renovated in 1980. They clad the entire thing in glass, and there's 79 or 80 or 78 of these things around the top and the cornice, and they ended up in salvage. And I think about a dozen of them managed to survive. Like I said, I've seen a few around. I walked actually into an antique dealer's place that was leaning against a sideboard in his house, and I said, I have to have it. So I ended up trading, I forget what it was, a clock and a carpet, I think. To own it, but it's one of those things that I had to have.
So Keith, how disappointing for you that it wasn't a crime that got him that. I knew you were sort of hoping that he would have a smash and grab raid or something to bring it in. So may I ask Robert a couple of questions?
Of course.
Great. We've already talked about the fact that Lucas Page has prosthetics, and I think we still, as a whole, are slightly uncomfortable with people who've lost limbs and think of them, as overcoming a disadvantage. But certainly Under Pressure, you've actually turned his prosthetics into a serious advantage. Did that just evolve? Did did it come to you all of a sudden that you had a guy with a couple of metal parts that might be really useful?
Might be useful, absolutely. And I'd be lying if I hadn't said I hadn't, gamed out a bunch of scenarios that may come into play in the future, because it doesn't have to be a setback. And that's the thing. That's one of the things I really liked about Lucas, is he doesn't look at himself as a victim, and the people around him don't look at him as a victim. And when people do look at him as a victim, it's infuriating. That being said, I'm not sure he wouldn't, not accept help if he's at the grocery store and couldn't reach something. But
yes,
that's-
well, I think as we age, we all go through. I mean, I had a knee replacement, and it made me, slightly, Karen's over here laughing, made me dependent in a way I hadn't been before, at least in the short term, which I resented. but it's how it goes. Another thing about Lucas that we didn't really bring out, he is an astrophysicist, and that, but it seems to me his unique talent and what makes him so helpful to the FBI is his pattern recognition capability. He is able to sift through enormous amounts of observation or data and recognize patterns. So is that something you're good at, or is that just kind of an idea that you thought would be incredibly useful for a hero?
It's a little bit of both. I'm not great at math per se. I can convert currencies to within 1/100 of a cent. For some reason, it's been a gift I've had since I'm a kid. So I can do currencies, and when I used to spend a lot of time in traffic, I played games with license plates, trying to find certain numbers of letters and see, how they could all be related to one another. But I'm not a mathematical person at all. Lucas, that just grew. I'm always fascinated by people that see the world in a different way. Whether it's Pablo Picasso, Jackson Pollock, or Lucas Page. And I read a book a few years ago called The Black Swan Theory of Events by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and it just enamored me with the way this man's mind worked. I was humbled, I was embarrassed, I didn't, I felt I wasn't allowed to have an opinion on anything, ever again after reading the book, and it just really surprised me. When you see somebody that's at the top of their field or can really do something well, I find it inspiring. So I was inspired by someone else to go that way, I guess we should say.
Fabulous. I see that Karen is here and might have a question or two. I've turned this microphone. Karen, do you want to speak up?
Okay, I had, early on in your book, Under Pressure, there is a conversation, and I was just looking to see if I could figure out who was having the and I wonder if you could speak to it a little more. The question is, what humanity needs is a little more humanity. And the second line is, what humanity needs is to finish what it started and go extinct. Could you comment on that?
Absolutely. I think because I look at human beings through the lens of Darwin and evolutionary mechanics, and when you look at the planet, 99.999, almost out of 1 million species that have ever been on the planet, 999,999 have gone extinct. So humanity is headed for extinction. It's just the way the world operates and the way natural selection tends to go. That being said, we keep trying to do things better. A certain segment of people keep trying to make things better, and there's a certain segment of people that are just seem like they're intent on driving us to extinction. So I guess what that sentence was meant to show that Aaron is very very positive person, and Lucas, even though he's positive, he realizes the chances for mankind. To Lucas, it's just a question of whether or not we're going to finish ourselves off before something else does. I think that's Lucas's view, and he'd like the world to be a good place and a safe place for his children, but he doesn't really see the world like that. So I hope that answers the question, because that's kind of what I intended when I wrote that little passage.
Okay. So basically, we do ourselves in before the next asteroid hits.
Well, something like that, or the next pandemic, or
Right.
That's the problem, yeah.
So Keith, I horned in. Did you want to carry?
The pandemic is an excellent sort of jumping off point, where it's sort of like, you wrote this entire book, and then we get hit by a pandemic that shut New York down. So that had to interfere with the whole writing process.
Well, we were just finishing up editing. I did the last pass on copy editing, and there was 2 little things that I put in the book a week before, and I left in. And I wish I would have mentioned somebody wearing a mask in one of the restaurants, because I assumed that we're going back to a post-COVID world eventually. So that would have been nice. Otherwise, my timing is just terrible, and the book will just read like, what do you think? Nobody's wearing a mask. This makes no sense.
Well, we hope there's a post-COVID world coming.
We do.
Yes, our fingers are all crossed.
Lots of writers that we have spoken to have really, in fact, almost all the writers we have spoken to said that they don't really want to acknowledge COVID. It's too soon to know what's going to happen. And so either they are sitting their books before, or they're projecting ahead, or maybe they'll just have a little tiny reference. But nothing will date a book probably more than to write something about COVID right now, and we have absolutely no clue where it's going. So this question comes up, Keith, in virtually every interview we do. So
I bet it does.
We have discussed it.
So lastly, I sort of wanted to talk about influences, and the classics being are you Harpo or Chico or Shemp or Curly, or getting more literary, are you more of an Ernest Hemingway or a John Dos Passos or Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler? What were your influences, and who do you think about when that you start to write?
I prefer Hammett over Chandler. I prefer Hemingway over Pesos, although Pesos was an American voice. I think I don't understand how this guy's not. Everybody doesn't know who he is more than Hemingway. I'm surprised by that. Stooges I can leave out entirely, so we're fine. Harpo and Chico are both great as far as I'm concerned. And I think they both did their thing. Influences. That's a good. We're all this. Cormac McCarthy said books are made out of other books. So, like that wall of books behind you, I've got 3 walls of books in my office here that they're little building blocks. It's like the Tetris of my brain. There's a great scene in the movie High Fidelity with John Cusack where he's organizing his albums, and his friend comes over, who's also a music hound, and he says, "How are you arranging these? These aren't alphabetical." He goes, "No." He goes, "Well, they're not by genre." He goes, "No." He goes, "Guess." He goes, "I don't." He goes, "Chronological." He goes, "Wow." Because they're trying to think of a new way to organize things. And I think you just look at different periods in your life and you'll find the books. I started out, I guess the first book that really knocked me out was Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Reading that book, I spent a summer in Europe. We were in Hungary. And the property we were staying at had a large orchard on it. I sat in the cherry tree. I didn't know anybody there. I didn't speak the language. And I read Huckleberry Finn maybe 15 times in that summer. And it was the first time I've been reading up until that point. I was an avid reader after I got turned on to reading. But it was the first book where I really thought, this is special. This is different than the other books. And I guess I'm trying to think, when I go from there to the next thing that was really special to me, that really knocked me out. I studied a lot of the classics. Hemingway in college really got to me. And I was walking to the bus stop one day and talking to a fellow by the name of James, who had just done a report on, not a report, but a talk on Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And we were talking about, after school, and I said, "What do you want to do when you get out of school?" He goes, "I want to be a novelist." And it was a light bulb moment for me, because I never assumed that a guy like me could be a novelist. Like, what do you mean? Faulkner is a novelist. Hemingway is a novelist. Guys like you and me are not novelists. So as far as an influence goes, I guess that would definitely come into play. And then, there's some great books after that. Seth Morgan's Homeboy, published in '92, I think is a great, great, great book. One of the series, actually, that influenced me when I started Under Pressure. Last winter, I went to Florida for about 8 weeks, and I was having trouble with the book a little bit, because the trick with writing a series is how much to include, especially for a guy like me who wants the reader to know just enough. And I was struggling with all these questions and talking to a friend on the phone. And the next day, UPS arrived, and she had sent me 4 books by John Galligan. He writes a series, the Clinch Knot, the Nail Knot, and I forget the other 2 right now. And it's about this detective that he goes fly fishing and solves mysteries while he's fly fishing. And it was just, I'd say that series really had a significant impact on me actually bringing Lucas to where it is now. I don't know, without Galligan's input, if I would have had that inspiration to see, hey, this is how it's done when it's done well, which is, every book that's been done well or done terribly has influenced me one way or the other.
Actually, I don't know this series at all. Do you, Barbara?
Yep, I do, but it wouldn't have occurred to me that, please, Keith, how can you even ask me that question?
It's an inobvious a link between my writing and that. It's totally different books, but it's done well, and when something's done well, you take what you can out of it.
Well, I will say that on Robert's website, and if you go to Robert Pobi, P-O-B-I is Pobi, robertpobi.com, there is a fascinating list of authors that he recommends, and I was so intrigued I actually copied it into my phone, which includes Jimmy Breslin, Peter Benchley, Emily Bronte, Michael Crichton. You do have John Galligan in here. Thomas
I have to. John's a great writer.
Yep. Rudyard Kipling, David Morrell, Mary Shelley, Hunter Thompson, Trevanian. Boy, there's a score. The Eicher sanction. Love it. Mark
That is my
Twain,
greatest.
and Gore
that-
Vidal, among others. So, I mean, I think that is a fascinating list, and they are so disparate. You know, it's like there's no real through line for this.
Oh no,
group of authors.
I've never had a through line. I was talking. Keith knows about this, but I had a learning disability growing up, and so I had to read with my mother every night for about 15 minutes from the age I was 7 till the age I was 10. And then from there, my parents, in order to encourage me to read, bought me things like Kipling and Twain. So I never got to read a lot of the stuff that kids were reading. And so I just thought automatically reading was about classics, per se. So up until about the age of 19 or 20, until I talked to James and realized guys like us can be novelists, until that point, all I read were classics. I didn't read a Stephen King book till 10 years ago.
Got it. So, Karen, did you have another question you wanted to ask? Or
No.
okay, then Patrick, let's move over. We may have questions from the audience. So, do you have anything you'd like to speak up with over there?
Sure. Let's
Sure,
see.
here he comes.
Actually, I have a question about your use of metaphors. Somebody says, longtime fan here. How do you come up with the metaphors? Like when you describe how Lucas feels like, quote, a piece of IKEA furniture someone slapped together without bothering to consult the instructions. We can all relate to that one.
Well, that one came to me one morning after I'd been out with some friends, honestly. That's how I felt. What I do is I hate cliches, and I try not to put it, like, I'll never say black is night, or, you know, I'm not a big fellow, I'm a big believer in language policing myself, but there's certain things I don't want to do. So if I read something in a book that, you know, he felt like his head was filled with, I don't know, butterfly, or his stomach had butterflies, I will find an alternate way to say it. And so I just look at the sentence a little bit differently. A lot of these things, I write down on little pieces of paper and slap them in my notebook. They'll come to me when I'm talking to somebody, especially with Lucas, because I know how he's going to, you know, what he's going to be doing in the future to a degree. So I try to, I'm not going to say load up on comments, but I try to pay attention to things in the world around me that might come in useful for him. So I just try not to write something that's been written before. And my metaphors, I get a lot of comments. People tend to like that stuff.
You know, I forgot to do our commercial, but let me do it at the moment. This wonderful book, Under Pressure, which we have, as I understand it, Robert will be sending us signed book plates from Toronto, where he lives. We can't ship books back and forth to Canada right now. So we'd encourage you to buy a copy, with or without a book plate. You will absolutely love it. And I want to ask Keith, before we revert back, what's going on with City of Windows in the paperback, Keith? Because I keep getting contrary dates.
Well, their paperback, it is out now in trade paperback. That's, hang on a second, I'll bring a copy up.
Oh, excellent. I can't find it. Oh. Okay.
It is here. It is released. It is available. I
And it's
recommend it.
fabulous.
Well, I'm so glad you said that, because I was chasing around after it on Friday, and for some reason our software didn't show it. So I will now go back and redo that.
I will send you the ISBN.
Thank you. That will help a lot. Well, in that case, I would really encourage you to order City of Windows and then read Under Pressure. You don't have to, but I think it's kind of more fun since we only have the two books to meet Lucas as he began and then as he carries on. Patrick?
And as Lee Child says, great plot, great setting. I loved it.
I'm with Lee.
Okay, Mark asks, are you going to stick with Lucas for a while, or do you have another series in mind going forward?
Was there a question in there? I did not hear anything.
Do you have another series in mind, or are you going to be sticking with Lucas for the near future?
I'm not good at multitasking, so Lucas and I are going to be hanging out for a little while. Lucas is going to be my main focus.
Wonderful. Keith, does he have a new contract? Tell me.
He has a new book, and he darn well better be writing on it.
Don't worry, I've been working on it.
So you got that from the horse's mouth, i.e. the editor's mouth, that there will be another Lucas page. Hooray!
How about any TV or film interest in the series?
Oh, there's a fun one. Talk about the film.
There has been interest. We've had 2 production companies. I've said no both times. I'm not at a point where I'm comfortable giving up that kind of control in my life. I don't want to keep sitting there. I know he wants to say all kinds of things, but probably the word idiot's going to come out of his mouth. But There has been interest. We've had a lot of people interested in it. It's really been a nice boost to the brand. So yes, we've had some television people have been sniffing around quite diligently.
I just remember how Sue Grafton would always refuse to sell the rights because she just wasn't willing to. And there are other stories of people who had movies made and been unhappy with the result. So those are the risks you take.
Absolutely. Well, I have no problem being unhappy with the results because it's a completely different medium. And like the book that you read in your head is not the book that I wrote in my head, and it's not the book that anybody in the audience has read in their head. So I understand someone's going to interpret it differently. It's just,
if Alan Ball comes and wants to make an HBO series, sign the contract.
It would depend what is in the contract. That's the whole thing. No.
Let's move on to another question.
That's all I got.
That's it. Well, I have a question for you, Robert.
Yes.
Yesterday we spoke to Fiona Davis, who has now written 5 novels, each of them inspired by a New York City landmark building, the Barbizon Club, the Dakota. The new one is the New York Public Library. Who knew that the superintendent of NYPL has a 7-room apartment within the library? Well, at least way back. I was fascinated with that. But why is it that you are so interested? Why is Lucas in New York? I guess that you're Canadian, so you're in Toronto. Why did you decide to set a series in New York? And why did you decide that New York City landmarks were going to be part of the attraction here? Because Lucas always, they start and then they sort of climax in relation to some really iconic parts of New York.
That's true. Well, my folks had an apartment in New York for 23 years while I was growing up. So I spent a lot of weekends there. I've had 3 cars stolen in New York. I know the city pretty well, let's put it that way. And I mean, it's Sodom and Gomorrah. Everything you need to find is findable in New York City. So and it's also, because it's a place that I know well, and because it kind of suits, it's got a real broad spectrum of what can go on. So I don't think it's an environment that's going to limit me in the future. I know Lucas is going to spend the next little while there. I know his wife's been getting job offers to move to the UK, and she keeps saying no, and he keeps saying let's go. So I'm kind of curious to see what will happen with that. But New York's just such a great environment. And as far as landmarks go, I was looking for a great place to host a party, and the Guggenheim just seemed like the environment. Plus, it had a nice open air to it. Plus, I could blow up a lot of Warhol paintings, like Keith said, in the process, or a silk screen. So I got to cross a bunch of things off a checklist with that.
Well, it certainly gives you an opportunity to make some pretty trenchant comments about the United States and what we're doing and all the rest.
Oh yeah, but I don't have to go to New York for that. I could just go to the sandwich stand in Delaware, or
No, absolutely
True.
But I do think it's interesting that it's like Lee is British, writing Jack Reacher, a quintessentially American series. You are Canadian, writing Lucas Page, an FBI agent, whatever, in New York City, and I find that is fascinating. Karen, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just have another comment after you're done.
Well, go ahead.
Okay, because the way I saw Lucas is he's a man when he's on the job, he's all content level. But when you put him in the home with the kids and his wife, he's, I guess, more human, or there's a softer side to them. Am I misinterpreting that, or did you deliberately do that?
No, that's a very good question and point. I absolutely did that with Lucas, because if he was just like he was in the street all the time, there'd be a lot of readers that would be turned off by him, because he's not a hard guy. So you have to see that there's just goodness behind him, which if you get 2/3 through the novel and there was no family, you would see that, because he does help. He tries to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. But the family's definitely necessary to show Lucas in his downtime, and to show him that he's a different person, and that he's a well-rounded person. He's not just a misanthrope or this grouchy guy that likes to insult people, because he doesn't mean to insult people. He just wants them to get out of his way so he can get things finished.
You bet. Actually, I can hardly wait to learn more about Lucas. I love the fact that you don't know very much about him. So that we'll all be exploring it. And as we're going to be talking to Mark Billingham on book 20, he has now written a prequel to his series character. And I do find that many, many authors, after they've written, I'm sure Keith runs into this constantly too, after they've written a number of books about a character, are moved to go back and explore that character before you met him. I think that's fascinating for readers and possibly for authors. Keith, do you think that that's kind of an integral part of a series, that dynamic comes to bear?
Oh, certainly. I mean, Lee Child did it with, I can't remember which book where he went back to, it was like 7, 8 books into the series. He did a one that was earlier. Was that The Enemy? I can't remember.
I don't remember the title, but he has one where his father figures in fairly recently.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you know, because they start at a point where this character walks on stage and something interesting happens, and at some point, a lot of writers think, well, I mean, Stephen Saylor did this with young Gordianus for 3 books, having sort of introduced him as an adult, and he sort of went back. And yeah, no, it happens occasionally. I mean, there are some writers that are happy to leave that part blank, but I think as long-running series goes on, then there becomes interest in who they were before that moment when the book started.
Well, you remember, I think it was for Emma's for Murder, but I won't swear to it, when Sue went back to explore Kinsey's early life. I'm pretty sure it was him. And I do think, Robert, it's an interesting part, you know, of writing a long-running character, that to visit them before we met him, so to speak.
It might be therapeutic in a way, yeah.
Yeah, after you've learned enough about him to do that, so it's too early yet, you know, your character's sort of like...
but there's still the incident we know nothing about yet.
Exactly, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff, you know, basically he's like Aphrodite floating in on her shell, you know, but at some point, you know, you might want to explain what happened to make him like he is. Or whatever.
Or I might not want to.
Or you might not, you devil. I know. We'll all be tormented by the whole thing. Honestly, he's really a fabulous character. We are all.
I agree.
Yeah, we are all such champions.
Thank you.
Here we are on a Sunday, you know, talking to you, which is just such a treat. And I'm delighted that you were willing to do an interview, because we feel quite honored that we've had a chance to have a conversation with you.
Well, I've been in your store. I was in Phoenix a couple of years ago. So it's and anybody that's willing to walk outside on an August afternoon to ask me questions, I would sit here for hours. You know, I feel bad I couldn't pass a drink through the screen. This is terrible.
Oh, wow.
How soon is your next book coming out?
Right. When are we looking, Keith? When are we looking for the next Lucas page? Do you have any thoughts yet? Because he's in charge of that part after you write it.
It's a little early to be saying that. It's still being written. My guess is, you know, with the way the world has changed and the challenges of publishing, we're probably talking about, you know, we'll see it in 18 months, is my guess.
That sounds about right. I would say the way things go. Yeah.
In the middle of an August afternoon.
Possibly 16.
Next book could be
It depends.
Maybe
but,
14.
You
know.
Let's go for 12.
No, not going to be 12.
Maybe we can look
You
at
got winter
publication date, so you could come and visit us without expiring on the spot. I remember years ago, a publicist booked a Norwegian author, I'm trying to think of her name, to come to the store in July. And about a week before she was, Karen Fossum it was, about a week before, the publicist called me and said, "Oh my God, I just read the temperature." She said, "I'm canceling the visit. We don't want her to die while she's on book tour." And I thought, okay, it really can be a shock to come here in the summer if you're not, you know, not used to it. Maybe the sort of Brits that had their blood thinned in India could survive, but the average Brit coming to Phoenix in the summer is a shock, and even Toronto is a different climate.
Well, you guys would have trouble going to Reykjavik. I guarantee you'd get off the plane and you'd freeze into a solid position, and that'd be it for you.
No. I've been to Reykjavik several times. No.
Oh, really? I'm impressed.
It's easier to go the other way. I've done both Arctics, the Antarctic, the whole bit. Now, I grew up in Chicago, though, so probably...
Oh, okay, so you know cold.
...condition for all that. But Keith is from Texas and now is like the super New Yorker, so it's interesting how we all change.
Well, you know, you can't stay in Texas forever.
Right, and Karen's from Duluth,
Duluth, Minnesota. And I'm still thawing out.
And she's still thawing out, so there we are. Guys, it's been wonderful. Thank you for your time, and I'd
Yes,
like to thank all of
you.
you who joined us on a Sunday afternoon. If you hang about for another few minutes, we're going to be talking to Lee Child and Mark Billingham, or of course you can watch our videos at any time and listen to the podcast at any time. And now that I know I can get City of Windows in paperback, I'll order it tomorrow. You can buy both that and Under Pressure from the Poison Pen as soon as we hang up. Thank you.
Thank you.